Okay, let me hit on.
Hi, this is Sugar Gay Isber, and this is my podcast, Jewelry as Your Side Hustle, Jim's Grit and Growth. But today we're not going to talk about jewelry. We're going to do something totally different. Another friend of mine from the Craft Alliance. Oh no, I'm going to say it wrong. CIA, Craft Industry Alliance. And we met on a Zoom call, and it's just lovely to get to meet her. And so, over the next hour, we're going to learn all about yarn, which is my going to be my next, I guess, second passion. I don't know. So here we have Kim Langley from Purveyor of Fine Yarns, and welcome to my podcast, Kim.
Thank
I'm so
you.
happy you're here.
I'm
Where,
excited.
where are you calling from? Where are you?
I am in my what I call my business room in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, beautiful Madison, Wisconsin. It's so gorgeous. And that's why you're wearing a beautiful sweater because it's like cooler up there. Today it's going to be like 105 here in Texas. So go figure.
Yeah, it's not 105 here. Okay. Yeah. It's still summer and it's still nice, but it's not we passed our 100-degree days.
Oh, so it's so nice to get that summer over with, and then we go into those crisp fall days. So tell me about you. How long have you been in the yard purveyor business? And tell me this kind of the story of how
Mhm.
yarn became your thing, because it's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's different because it's not like I grew up wanting to start a yarn company. I kind of fell into it. I I'm an analyst by trade, a
Okay.
financial analyst. I used to work on budgets, different industries from television to state government to politics, but always doing the same thing, budgets, numbers, fiscal analyst stuff, right? Different sectors, same thing. And I just decided at some point, it's like, oh, I know, it was 2008 when everybody was getting laid off during the housing crisis.
I remember
So,
well.
yeah, so I was again one of those people, and I did a lot of interviews, and I was living in Hawaii on Oahu, and it came Hawaii got hit really bad. I mean, you would do interviews, and instead of doing one, I would be doing two, three interviews for the same position, like with against 20 other people. It was just
Wow.
like it was really bad. So I decided, okay, I need to do something else. So I started a yarn store because I'd always been knitting. And I looked at it from a business perspective. It's like, what are the things I know best? We looked at the market, and I knew there was a yarn store closing, and I knew it had been a pretty stable environment. It's not a huge market, but it was stable. And they'd always had three yarn stores on the island. So I figured, okay. And I took a long time looking for space. A friend and I, we would drive every back road on Oahu. We drove all over Honolulu looking for space. And I finally got a space, and I was a yarn story. And I was the yarn lady on Oahu for 6, 8, 7 years. And, just sold yarn. And I really liked it. It was fun. It was low key. And then for various reasons, I needed to move back to the mainland, uh, you know, the continental United States.
Not an easy move.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. And I had originally thought, well, that's okay. I'll go back. And I'm in the Midwest because I'm from the Midwest, and it was like family type reasons. So it's like that's how I ended up in Madison. And I was going to start a yarn store again, but retail is really brutal. It's like
Huh.
you always on, I was open 6 days a week. And even if I wasn't at the store, I was still working on things.
Yeah.
So after I decided to take a break for a month or two, and then I said, yeah, I don't want to go back to retail. And I looked around at wholesale. I looked at some other sectors. I managed an organic farm for a while. Was a business manager on an organic tomato farm. That was a really
Wow.
good time. That was fun.
Oh, great tomatoes. I'm tasting them right now.
Yeah. And then I found out about this woolen mill, and I decided, well, if I'm serious about wanting to understand the fiber industry and kind of see where I can go with that, I decided to work at this woolen mill because, my theory has always been if you want to learn something, just get a job somewhere in the industry, usually at the bottom, and figure out how it works.
Oh my gosh, that must have been so interesting. So, like probably like train loads. I know it comes in train loads sometimes, the amount of wool that people get to go
Well,
into
yeah, and
a
this was a
mill.
traditional type of woolen mill. It was the equipment is over 100 years old.
I love it.
Okay, so think, that Lowell, Massachusetts, the mill
Yeah,
girls, they would have been very familiar with these machines. Same machines. The technology for spinning yarn hasn't changed much since 1880. I mean, it's
right.
and this mill, I was going to say they have more safety precautions, but this mill, because it was very, that the owner had removed all the safety features because, for one
Yeah,
reason or another, it's like you need to check something, you'd have to remove the safety covers. So she just
right.
started leaving them off. Okay. So yeah, it was like old style, but it was interesting. And I was doing prep work. So before wool can go on a mill equipment, which is huge. I mean, we're talking a building the size, the length of a basketball court,
Wow.
and the equipment, the carder, I can't even compare it. It'd be like, it would barely, if you were to put it on a basketball court, it would probably reach to the half court line.
Wow.
I mean, it's two machines, they're huge. They actually kind of built the building and left the end wall open in order to put these machines in.
Wow.
When she got the machines 30 years ago from Massachusetts, yeah, they had built the building, left the wall open on the end, and then the semi, basically, they had to get special equipment to get them off and into the building, and then they built the end wall.
Wow.
So it's like, and then eventually they built another, they needed more space, and then they built like another section onto that building. So now if they were to get them out, it would be really tricky.
Yeah. So this is like a set thing. So
Yeah.
carding wool, let's talk about that. So you get this big chunk of wool. You have to clean it somehow first, right?
Right. So
Clean.
that's what I did. I would clean wool because there's two ways of doing it. So if you're doing the carder, it's really two things. So you have people that are selling wool by the bale, which is usually 500 pounds.
Right.
Okay. And that kind of wool is going to be 1,000 pounds of wool can be washed in a scouring plant, of which there are only two in the United States.
Wow.
Okay. One is in North Carolina, one is in San Angelo, Texas.
Yeah, I knew I was already thinking San Angelo's got a big wool. I've been
Yep,
to
they
San
have a big wool
Angelo.
industry down there, and that's where the big scouring plant is. So, but to go into that scouring plant, the minimum is 1,000 pounds
Wow. So are
because
they
that's how
boiling
big it
it?
is.
Do they use
Well,
water to boil
basically,
it?
to
Steam?
wash wool on any level, you need very hot water and soap, like dish soap, that kind
Yeah,
of
because
soap, a
the oils have
degreaser,
to come off. The lanol,
the
lanol.
lanolin, which we call the grease.
Hmm.
So this woolen mill had two distinct segments. They would process large quantities of wool for their own yarns. They would buy a clip and they'd have like maybe 2,000 pounds of wool that they would process for their own brand. Then they did what's called custom spinning. And this means anybody who has a few sheep or is buying wool from various people and wants to make their own yarn, you can take it to a woolen mill who will do custom spinning. And that's what I did was I would go through that wool because often people bring in stuff that maybe is good, maybe it's not, or it's got to be gone through because the mill equipment, if
So
there's,
freshness.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you don't want crap in it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I would what's called skirt, which means I lay the wool out on a table, like a screen. And that way any dirt falls through. And then you kind of look at it too to make sure it's like quality wise because the mill can't take if wool is weak or has breaks, it will just break into the equipment and it's not going to
Right.
do anything.
Right.
And that's caused by various environmental factors. So one of the things I would do is I would look at that wool and I would pull it apart and check the fibers that they were strong. It's called grading, just
Okay. Yeah.
checking
Yeah.
their
That makes
quality.
sense. Yeah.
And then I would also skirting means basically you're going to go through that wool and you're going to look for thistles,
Sticks things.
shit,
Yeah.
crap.
Yeah.
hard pieces of what we call tags, which is grease that is the lanolin that has gotten a lot of dirt attached to it, and it forms like clops. I mean, clops, almost like a clod,
Yeah.
and it hangs
And
in lumps.
I've seen that on sheet before.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff you have to remove. So all that has to be pulled off manually, and
Wow.
then we wash it, and by washing it, we had, there are different ways to wash wool, but when you're doing these smaller quantities, the woman I worked for at that mill, she had developed a process using old Maytag washing machines,
Oh, I love it.
and these machines were like 20, 30 years old, right?
Okay.
But what she'd done is had the, agitators disconnected. So
Right.
basically, you have tubs that spin.
Right.
And the thing is, to wool, people think wool, oh, it's gonna felt, it's gonna, get all messed up if you put it in anything,
Hot
right?
water. Yeah.
But it's not true. To felt wool, you need 2 things. You need agitation and hot water. So if I and to clean wool, you need hot water that's at least 150 degrees,
Get the
um,
oils out. Yeah.
because that lifts the lanolin off it.
Yeah.
So what you do is you fill these washing machines up with 150-degree hot water, put your soap in, which is just basically it's similar to dish soap. I mean, we just got it
Yeah.
in 50-gallon tubs is all, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Yeah.
you
Like
could
it's,
use I use dish soap to wash wool,
yeah,
and it
like
works
Dawn.
really well.
It
It's a
cuts
degreaser,
grease. Yeah.
cuts the grease. And you you put your soap in, stick your hand in with a heavy rubber glove over it.
Okay.
So the soap is all mixed in already because 'cause you're not gonna move that wool. So you wanna make sure your soap is all dissolved and throughout the
Right.
water. And then I would just dump the wool in and let it settle into the water. And then you just press it in so that all the wool is underwater, and you let it sit. And then you're not agitating it. You're just
Right.
putting it in the hot water, pushing it down to make sure it's all
Right.
covered.
Yeah.
Put the lid down, let it sit for 20 minutes, hit the washing machine to spin. So you spin that water out,
Yep.
and that's just, what do you call it? Centrifugal force.
Yep.
So all the wool ends up on the sides of the machine.
Yep.
Again, isn't agitation, it's just pushed back.
Right.
And then you can fill it up again with hot water.
Oh, and do a rinse.
Well, usually, depending on the wool, we would do 2 washes
Oh,
and then 3 rinses.
wow.
And if there were certain breeds have different levels of grease in their wool.
Yep.
So most breeds of wool, we did 2 washes, and washes are really just soaks with soap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then 3 rinses, which is just using the clear water and spinning it out and filling it up, letting it sit, spin it out again, would generally get you very clean wool, okay?
Now it's
There
got
are
to dry,
some.
else it's going to stink. Because,
Yeah, and it's then actually you have this really beautiful suddenly from being gray and dirty and all this crap in it, you get this brilliantly white wool. It's amazing what water and soap can do. And then you have to dry it because it's gotta be dry before it can touch the machines. And you dry it on racks that have to be able to have the water air has to circulate
yes.
above and below the
Yeah.
wool.
So it's a
So,
screen, like a screen
yeah,
kind
the screen and we had the screens attached on racks going up the wall, and then you have a fan at one end. You have a couple just a couple fans,
yeah.
so the air circulates, and then that's how you dry wool, and then once the wool is totally dry, we bag it. We used to use these big heavy duty, clear, but, like, just plastic bags to move wool from one piece of the thing to the next, right? You'd stick it in a bag, move it over to the picker, and then the picker is a machine that goes the wool goes through and it fluffs it up, separates the fibers, fluffs it up, and it also allows, things to, like, fall, like any little sticks that are still in it or
Right.
what we call VM, vegetable matter,
Okay.
and then from the picker, it goes to the carder. So, in the carder is this big machine, and you put the wool in at one end, and it goes over a series of drums with, like, a mesh little wires sticking up from a mesh. that hold it. I don't know how to describe it.
So
It's
it's a
like,
picker. So it's picking. So I'm kind of thinking about like when they do with cotton, they like comb it sort of. It's like
yes,
that.
except that what it is it's big drums. If you can think of a big circular drum on it, like
Huh?
a 50-gallon drum, but these are like three times
Massive.
that size. They're
Right.
massive. And then on the outside of the drum are all these little wires 1 inch long that are sticking out and pointy. And as the drums go around, the wool catches on the wires, and then it catches on the next drum. And there's a series of these drums, like 4 or 5 of them of different sizes, from very big ones at the bottom to smaller ones at the top. And as the drums go through, as everything is turning, the wool is getting pulled from the bigger drum up through the system till at the end it's on a smaller drum, and it's all being pulled off the drum in a sheet. It's called a web.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and that web then goes over a conveyor into the next machine where again it goes through this process of being constantly pulled out and put into a web and pulled out, and just it's constantly being pulled and folded basically. So one machine is these drums that are
Right.
pushing the
Spinning.
fiber through and spinning, and then on the other system, it's just that web is being pulled out and thinned and pulled out and thinned, so that at the end of it, you've got that web is in like a half-inch wide pencil roving
Okay. So still
on a
pretty big.
roll. Yeah, but
Yeah.
still big, and it goes on this big roller that takes 2 people to lift, and then that would go on the spinning machine.
And now it's going to become thinner.
And then the spinning machine has a bunch of, it's gonna put it on cones, not really, what are they called? They're wooden. I'm blanking on the proper name for it, but
Okay,
it's
but
like
it's
this.
kind of like a peg and it's like spinning it around to keep
Right,
it organized.
exactly. And
Kind of
the
like
thing
the
is,
skein.
yeah, I mean, if you there's lots of places you can Google for that. In fact, I can give you a link that you can show people how to look at a spinning mill in operation. But once it goes through that, so then you have this pencil roving that goes onto these cones, and the whole thing is about being it thinner, 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 right?
Right.
So you get the single plies, and then the single plies, those cones are gonna go on a different machine where all the singles are put into 2 plies or 3 plies, and that's when you actually have yarn. A single
Now,
ply is not that great, but, and you do these things by shifting the machine is run by, the gears, you change the gears to make it either how thin you want those singles to be. And then again, on the plying machine, you can adjust the machine for how you want it applied. What we call the twist. I mean, that's a very, very short version. But
where does the color come in?
oh,
Because,
but that's much later.
oh,
So
really?
after
Oh,
you have there are 2 ways to do color. So the most common way is that you dye the yarn. So after the yarn is plied and it's put into the length of the yarn, like if you want a skein, which can be
right.
any length, maybe 250 yards or 400 yards or 100
Wow.
yards. Wow.
Wow.
Okay,
Big
so once
thing.
you've got your skeins, that's generally when people are dyeing yarn. And then you have how you want to do it. We had a 30-gallon, what actually it looks like it was a restaurant piece of equipment from a restaurant where they would make soups in.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a standalone huge 30-gallon thing, and that's what she dyed yarn in. Myself, I don't have that luxury of having that standalone with its own gas source thing, and I dye yarn in smaller quantities and just use a stovetop, for my heat source. But the
Now, but
process is
you're
the
not just
same.
sticking it down like spaghetti, like it's on, like it's in
No,
a, yeah,
no,
because that would
no,
make a mess.
no. What you do is each skein is tied off, so it's not
Okay.
gonna tangle with very loose ties. And then my system is similar to what was done at the woolen mill because I thought was very practical, is that the skeins are then tied together on she would use, twine, just regular twine, like baling
Right.
twine, and you use these lengths of time because it's really rough, so it's easy to find because the
Right.
yarn is not, so the twine is
Yes.
rough, so you can reach in and feel the twine and find it, And so you'd put like however many skeins of yarn you're dyeing, you would split them up into different bundles on the twine kind of evenly and then put them in your dye pot. So in the dye pot is just hot water with your dye mix in it, whatever your dye mix is.
Right.
And then you let it soak as you increase the heat. And then as it heats, there are a couple people of different this is where people get very proprietary about how they do their dye process. Like when they put in their mordant,
Right. It's
some
like the,
people put the citric acid in at the beginning of the process, which means your dye is going to strike very quickly. Some people are vinegar because you need an acid.
yeah.
Most wool
Right.
is an acid, okay?
Right.
And then, but other people are kind of proprietary because if you put the acid, your mordant in at different points in the process, it changes how your
How
yarn,
intense.
how it
Yeah.
takes, right? Where
Yeah.
when it when the dye does its final stick, right?
Now, is there a fixative or is the vinegar also the fixative?
No, that's what I mean by mordant.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
mordant is what causes those dye molecules, the chemistry to
Right.
change, but it can't be just the mordant. You also need heat. So if you were to try to dye acid dye in cold water,
Wouldn't work.
it's well, it might work eventually, but it would take a lot longer. And to be
Right.
honest, I've never tried it to say I definitely
Yes.
say it doesn't work. But the
Yeah.
idea is that you need heat because the
Yeah.
heat with the acid, it causes those dye molecules to
Sure.
bond with the wool molecules,
Yeah.
and that's what's the stick, right?
I
And if
believe that.
you get the heat up and you have your right amount of acid, your dye is not gonna run. It's gonna stick,
Right.
it's permanent, it's not gonna do anything. Like, when I dye yarn, you look in my pots, you don't see any color. The water is clear.
After
So
you, when you've rinsed it, like when
no,
you
before
rinse
I've
it.
rinsed it. When I
Really?
dye yarn, my stick, I put my mordant in and how I do my process, that means that when I go to take the yarn out of that pot, the water is clear. I have almost what's called 99% take up. There's no dye in
Wow.
the water.
Okay, I've dyed things with Rit dye, like tons over my lifetime, tons. And there's always dye in the thing.
Yeah.
Like, am I
Well,
doing
Rit
something wrong?
dye, I could explain why Rit dye, because Rit dye it's not just for acid. What they do with Rit dye is they put in dye for both cottons, which is a different dye process,
Right.
and for acid. So the idea with Rit dye is it's going to the part of that dye powder that's meant for acid will stick and the rest will wash out.
Okay.
So you're
So I'm
gonna get
not
a
doing it
lot
wrong.
of rinse with Rit dye.
Yes. Else it's going to come off in your washing machine if you ever, I don't know.
Yes.
I've done that a million times too. Like, oh my God.
But
Like,
but my one of my frustrations were when there was a time where it seems like everybody is going to be a hand dyer and people would be posting on boards and stuff on Ravelry about, "So, is all the dye supposed to run out when you, dye yarn?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no,
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 whoa. Yeah, you don't want that. You're wearing a sweater
no."
and you get wet, and all of a sudden you got a puddle of blue at the bottom of your
Yeah.
feet.
And the thing is, like I said, my process is the water is clear. So that
Oh,
usually I only have to rinse things once or twice and be clear.
oh, that is remarkable. So it
But
is
there
the
are
difference between wool dye. Wool dye.
well, and this is dyeing wool, which
Yeah,
is or silks, which are acid dyes, right?
right.
Um, cotton
Silk
is a whole
dyes.
other process, and I don't deal with cotton yarns
Okay.
anymore, so I'm out of practice on that one.
And then what about like Angora wool and some of those more
Well,
exotic?
it depends. Angora can be 2 things. It can be from a goat
Yep.
or from rabbits, but both of those are protein fibers, and
Oh,
protein fibers are acid dyes. So any protein fiber, so that means wool, cashmere, um, Angora, mohair. I've dyed mohair. Um, I'm trying to think if I've dyed Angora. Maybe a blend. I don't think I've ever I don't think I've ever dyed a 100% Angora, from the rabbits. I don't think I've ever done that. But in principle, because it's a protein fiber, it should have it's the same process. Protein fibers are acid is the mordant. You want an acid dye.
and so now you've dyed it and it's wool. And now when you want to blend like two colors together or three colors, which I've seen beautiful wools, and
Oh, yeah,
wool
there's all
yarn.
kinds of wait, I mean, indie dyers, I mean, I'm talking about dyeing in a pot, right? Where you're doing
Okay.
a solid or a semi-solid. If you want to paint it, then that's a different process. You can paint the yarn. There are so many different ways to dye yarn.
I had
Once
no
you have a
idea.
skein, and there's another way to do it, which mills can do, which is you dye the fiber before it goes through the carder. And then that dry dyed fiber can be carded in a specific order to create a pencil roving that is going to show up with long segments of color, right? Because you're putting it and you do it by weight. Like, for example, you may dye 40 pounds of wool blue and another 40 pounds red, and then another 20 pounds yellow, right? And then you're gonna decide so you've got red, blue, and yellow, and you can make now wool that is green,
Oh,
purple,
right.
or
Of
orange.
course.
You just have to
Oh,
put it in
oh,
the carder in the
yes.
percentages together, and that
Yes.
carder
Yes.
is going to mix that yarn
Gotcha.
so that visually when you look at it, it's going to look whatever color you want, right? Or whatever color it is. But even if it looks say orange, if you look at it very closely, you're going to see that the fibers are yellow and red, but together from a distance, they're going to look more orange. Or you do an orange and you throw in some red to get you a heathered color, or you do a natural gray, but as you're putting it in the mill into the carder, say you put in that gray wool, that natural gray, and then you throw in 20 pounds of that same wool that has been dyed green. That's gonna give you a heathered yarn because those green fibers are gonna be mixed into it through the carding process, and it's gonna come out as a gray wool with flecks of green. Think
Wow.
tweed,
Yeah.
heathered, and those kind of things have to be done at the mill level, right? Because you need that
Yeah.
carder to mix the wool,
Right.
which can be quite fascinating, but I'll tell you, it's a pain to clean the carder afterwards. Because before you do the next job, you've gotta clean all that stuff off.
Perfectly. Yes. Of course.
And I prefer to dye personally, this is just my personal preference. I much prefer dyeing skeins to dyeing 30 pounds of loose wool.
Right.
I mean, there's just the techniques are different. How you corral it and what process you use to do it is a little different.
It
Yeah.
must have been a wonderful job so that you really understood everything about the product that you're going to be selling. And you understand that it's a fine wool. Like, I mean, you understand the grading process. Like, how invaluable was this job to you? Because
Oh,
you
this
really
is how
got,
I fell into having this yarn business because as I'm learning to skirt this wool, I'm realizing that I can tell what breed it is by the feel of the fleece and looking at it,
wow,
right? And
wow,
so and the woman I worked for was extremely knowledgeable about the fiber industry. She'd been in the business for like 30 years, she knew all about it. So I kept learning more and more about the wool, and I became fascinated about how the different breeds presented. Like certain breeds are known for different qualities. And that got me really interested. And that's how I decided to start my own yarn brand because there wasn't a lot of there very few people doing breed well when I started this 3 years ago in 2021. And at that point there were very few places doing single breed yarns. And there was only one other company I could find that was really focused on local, their Fibershed, and I use Fibershed in the sense that it's fiber produced within I consider it a day's drive, some
okay,
place I can
yeah,
reach in a day. That's to me,
right,
that's local.
right,
Um, and part of my reason for this is also seeing that there are all these farmers out there with wool and nowhere to sell it because they were too
right,
small to
yes,
get into the larger
yes,
markets.
yes,
They didn't have enough sheep. And
right,
so a lot of farmers sell to the shearer. Okay, so this is the thing people don't understand about wool. If you buy a commercial wool, just some common brand that Michaels or, common commercial wool, that wool comes from what's called the wool pool. Okay.
Okay.
And the wool pool there's only like, there used to be 3, now there are less. There used to be 4, but anyway, there are less buyers, big buyers, right, that buy wool.
Yeah.
And they're the big buyers. And the shearers generally have a contract with one of these big buyers that when they are done shearing, they will take their bags, and a shearer's bag carries 250 pounds of wool. They're
Wow.
these
It's a lot.
huge gunny sacks, okay?
Yeah.
And it's going to be wool from wherever he's been shearing. It's not
Right.
separated. It's like
Right.
whatever it is, if
Right.
and a lot of wool is crosses,
Right.
crossbred sheep. And then, but if he's only going to if he knows he can sell it to the wool pool, these companies that buy large amounts of wool for, say, 40 cents a pound, maybe
Wow.
75 cents a pound, the wool price has gone down. It's only gone down in the
Wow. That's
last
horrible.
8 or 10 years,
Oh,
right?
that's
It used
horrible.
to be 20 years ago, farmers could sell their wool and have enough money maybe to like buy the feed for the winter or something, right?
Right.
Now the wool, they sell their wool, it doesn't even pay for the shearing.
Oh no.
And often the shearers, and they've got to carry this wool around,
Yes.
and they've got to then meet up with the wool pool at some point to offload it. So if they're only going to get 40 cents a pound, they're only going to pay the farmer's lucky if he gets 5 cents.
Right. But the wool has to come off of the sheep every year.
Has to come off of the sheep.
So it's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
we're at least it's gonna
So the
like cover
farmers
the
are making
cost.
right, and the farmers are making their money on
The meat.
the meat production, right? And that's what it is. I mean, and it used, like I said, there was a time when fleece was worth a lot more, so it was a dual market. But the wool market has just plummeted to such a degree that that is no longer viable. So they're making their money on the meat market. The wool is just something they're trying to like get
Offload.
offload. And then you have me, and I decided, well, there's so many of these small producers that if I could provide a market for them and pay them a fair price,
Could help the
a
whole
better
industry.
price than the wool pool,
Yeah.
then, that's good for them, good for me, right? So I go in and offer them $1 a pound.
Which is tremendous, but you only want one kind of sheep.
But I'm particular.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm only looking for sheep that are 100%. Um, Usually they're registered with the breed associations, or there are different ways of knowing that they're
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I always get affidavits from anybody I buy from because I figure if you're willing to write down that it's
Yes.
100%, then
Yes.
I believe you. Because
Right.
why would you sign that if it wasn't?
Right. Right. And
Because
you would kind
sometimes,
of know too by touching
and
it.
I kind of know, by looking
Yeah.
at the fleece, I can tell if it's too much.
Yeah.
But yes, but I only buy specific types of wool. But there's quite a bit of that out there too. It's just a matter of finding it, you know.
So when you get it, it's like virgin, never been dyed before.
Well, no, I get wool. I mean, I drive so many county roads, okay?
I think that's
And
cool.
and I go out and they'll pull out bags if I don't get there on shearing day, which I try to go on shearing day sometimes, but that's not always practical. So let me tell you. So like the last time, I go out to this place, um, and he knows I'm coming. I always try to, I'm trying to give him I'll be there between 10 and 11
Right.
because I've
Yeah.
gotten lost a few times, okay?
Right.
But, I go out, they'll have bags of wool, and I will pull from the bags, and I'll pull out segments of wool. I'll check it for strength. I'm gonna look at it for color. I'm gonna paw through it and see how much shit is in it. And and poop, literally.
Yeah.
It's like,
I know.
how clean is this wool, right?
Right.
How much vegetable matter is in it?
Yeah.
And then, if it's really bad, I may only
Because you're
offer them
paying
like,
for that too, right?
yeah,
Like,
because I pay for weight, and if the weight
yeah.
is a lot of heavy
Junk.
stuff, then
Yeah.
I say, "Well, I'll offer you 85 cents a pound
Yes.
because look, there's all this chunks,"
Right.
right?
Worthless
Um,
chunks.
if it's fairly clean, I'll offer them $1 a pound. If it's and that's when I don't know them, and I don't even know if this will make a good yarn.
Right.
Because to be honest, I've had a few times when I've bought large quantities of wool, got it to the mill, and can't do anything with it. It will not hold on the, you know what I mean? It's like once it's been washed and they try to put it through the equipment, it's weak, or it just won't hold together. Or I mean, yeah, so I've lost money on these things a few
Now, do you
times.
have to just throw it away at that point?
Um, there are different things we can do, like, I could tell you about some Suffolk that I have in bags if you'd like to buy pillow bats.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah.
Wool inserts for
You're
pillows.
right, and they make excellent
Oh,
pillows, and it's just one of those things that I need to start marketing, but I've been so focused on just getting my supply line straight that it's just waiting till I have time to make phone calls. But that
right.
was one of the things we did because the Suffolk would not stay on the carder. It you know what I mean? It has to get pulled through the carder, it's going to be
Yeah.
drafted,
Yeah.
and this wolf, for whatever reason, she could only it would go so far, and then it would
And
literally
break.
drop. It would
Yeah.
just drop on the floor. So, but bats is a little different because it's a machine where you're putting in a certain amount and it just spreads it that far, right? So we could make pillow bats out of it. That worked. So I have pillow bats. And they'll sell. It's just a matter of when I have time to like deal with it. They're just bagged up right now. But I have put them in pillows and I use a pillow with wool bats and it's like I love it. It's like the most comfortable thing I've ever had.
And
So
natural instead of, just some,
it's not polyester fill.
yeah,
It's natural.
right.
It holds up really well.
And that's a vintage kind of way of doing it. So there's a whole nother
Mhm.
level of that because it is,
Right.
you
But
know,
there have been times where it's like I've had to throw wool away because it's not gonna go anywhere. So it's like compost, it's like, okay. It composts really well, okay?
well, hair has got a lot of nutrients in it. So I
And wool
compost our hair.
yeah, and wool is a nitrogen fixer. So and now there's started to be this thing with pellets, if you've caught into that, the wool pellet thing.
I don't know anything about that.
Somebody in the Midwest, out west basically realized that a lot of people farms and stuff have been using wool for compost and in mulch and stuff because you have it and it's a
Yeah.
good thing, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of typical urban gardeners, they're going to look at that and say, "Yeah, no, that looks funky and it smells and maybe not want it around," right? So somebody figured out a way to take that raw grease wool and make it into pellets. So it
Okay.
looks like something that for like an urban gardener is much more palatable,
It still has all that rich
but it has
nitrogen.
all the nutrients of that raw because it's raw wool. All they've done
Yeah.
is they've put it they also do a kind of a flash burn on it to get out any seeds that might be mixed into it. So they don't have to worry
Heat
about
it up. Yeah.
yeah, they
Heat it
heat
up
it
a
up
bit.
enough to kill any seeds because that
Yeah.
is one of the problems with using raw wool as mulch is that
Grass seeds are in there.
grass
Yeah.
seeds, all that kind of stuff. So like, I use it in my garden because I know it, so I just kinda watch for it. It's
Right.
something pops up, you pull it out.
Not the worst thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing. But, for an
Do you have any sheep?
no, I don't. I live in Madison. I have
Oh,
no sheep, and the thing is I grew up on a farm, but we never had sheep. We raised goats, beef cattle, you know? I milked goats for years when I was growing up, but
wow.
yeah, I have a what I would call a diverse background.
Yeah. Well, I love me some good goat's cheese, but I wouldn't know how to make it. I mean, I've probably seen a YouTube
No,
video.
we never did the cheese, we just my father decided at some point we drank too much milk,
Okay.
so, he got a goat, and that's the milk we drank.
Does it taste that much different, tangier, like goat's cheese? No.
W well, supposedly, but, if that's all you drink, you don't
No, that. Yeah.
know that, and
I
as
know it's for
kids,
sale.
we used to give it out we used to tell people to give them tests and stuff to see if they could tell the difference,
Oh,
but
really?
nobody really ever did.
Oh, wow. I didn't know. I would have thought the flavor would have been really unique.
If it's cold,
It's still
I don't
good.
think
Still
it's
good
I
stuff.
mean, like I said, I haven't drank it for a long time, but
Yeah.
there were, like, 3 years there that's all we drank was goat milk.
Wow. Wow. Well, you can buy it in the store now. So
Yeah,
some,
see?
some people are allergic to cow milk, so they have to, I guess, have that. So,
Oh.
okay, so now tell me about your business. So now you left that place, obviously, at some point. So I'm
Well,
not
I
putting
worked
it.
at the mill part-time until a year ago, and I always
Wow.
worked part-time because it was like I was doing the wash for custom jobs, so that kind of business fluctuates a little bit, so it's like I would work 2 days a week I would do prepping wool for custom jobs, and I would run the dye pot when I was there and dye yarn for her. And then, but there'd be times when
There wasn't any
she would,
work.
so I'd be 2 days a week. Then maybe it would get busier and I'd be 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
Then maybe there'd be times where it's like, that kind of work does not pay very well. So, in order for me to do this sounds ridiculous, but in order for me to do that job, occasionally I'd have to stop and take a temporary full-time job for 2 months
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
could make some money, catch up on my expenses,
Right.
basically so I could afford to work for her,
Fabulous. Like what
which
a
is
thing. You're
which
very committed. But what it did do is it gave you an education beyond an education.
yes, I know a
So
lot about wool. I
yeah.
understand wool, how it works. It taught me a lot about the fiber industry in general. And then when I wanted to go out and make my own yarns, the first ones I did were spun at the mill where I worked. And then I started exploring, and the woman who owns that mill, she wants to retire. So she's been scaling back. So I mean, there's been no work for she stopped doing custom jobs. So basically she didn't need me anymore at all. Because she's doing a lot less volume than she's done before. So I haven't
That's
worked
sad
for her
too.
like a year, but my own business has picked up. So it's like I
So
do that.
where do people find your
So where do you
products?
find me? So I do fiber festivals because when I first started, fiber festivals get you seen.
Right?
You get hundreds or depending on the festival, thousands of people walk by your booth in a day and see your yarns. And it's great for me because it also helps me refine what I'm offering. Because as people are going through your booth, you take notice of what they're
Oh,
picking up,
the
what
feedback.
sells,
Yeah.
what they pick up, look at, and put back on the shelf, which is
Right.
almost more important than what sells. It's
Right.
like, why are things not selling? Um, what breeds are more familiar to people? There's a I do a lot of education because breed specific yarns are a niche, I would say, in the yarn community. Not everyone is aware of it or aware of the qualities and how it can benefit what you're doing by knowing the different qualities of these different breeds. Like so a lot of people don't realize that there are breeds of sheep whose wool will not felt no matter what you do to it. It's not going to felt.
Oh, so then you can wash it and
You
agitate it and it
can
won't.
wash it in the machine and it
Gotcha. It
won't
won't
felt.
shrink up. That's really the
Not
shrinkage part,
yeah,
right?
and that's one people are always totally surprised about, that I have sock yarns that are natural wool. They're not superwash, so that weakens the fiber superwash process. So these are natural wools, but they're from a breed of sheep that wool will not felt, and those are the, down breeds, like Suffolk, Horn Dorset, Oxford. Cheviot is not a down breed, but it acts like a down breed. And so those are some of the things that I learned along the way. And those yarns are interesting, right? They're different. So I do fiber festivals, I do large fiber festivals, and I have a website. During the summer, I do fiber festivals in the May. And like right now, I'm like frantically in my countdown phase because my biggest shows are in the fall.
Ah,
So I will be at Wisconsin Sheep and Wool, which is in Jefferson, Wisconsin, the second weekend of September.
okay.
And
People can find you
then
there.
yeah, and then I'm at New York Sheep and Wool in Rhinebeck.
Oh, wow. So you're
Yeah.
really traveling too. That's quite a drive.
It's quite a drive, but it's also like I applied there. I went once before I kind of started this business, the year before I started this business. I went there because it was a bucket list thing to go to Rhinebeck.
Okay. Yeah.
And I volunteered to work at their fleece show so I could study with the judges because that's also one of my things is learning more about wool. So I'll go to wool shows, sheep and wool shows, and volunteer with there's almost always a fleece contest.
Okay.
And I always volunteer so that I can be around when the judges are judging and can take notes for the judge or something. So I learned from the judges what they're looking for, how to judge the fleeces. It's like a interest of mine.
Yeah. You should be a judge.
I would love to be a judge, but you're not known. So part of
Right.
being a judge is the fluke of being known, right?
Right.
But I have studied with some excellent judges like Judy Moore and Letty Klein by listening to them, which is you learn a lot.
I bet they can learn from you.
Oh, not these judges. They are
Okay.
excellent. They are so good. They're so knowledgeable about the different fleeces, and they've been doing this for decades. Live sheep judging and fleece judging, some of them. So
Oh, they're
very
actually looking at
educational.
the wool on the sheep to see the
Yes,
quality before it comes
judges,
off.
well,
Wow.
some judges, like one judge that I learned from, Judy Moore, actually started judging the live animal contests. Because sheep they have tons of contests at these things.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I'm not as conscious of the live animal ones, what they do, but she would judge those. And then she got pulled into judging fleeces because, that's part of the live judging on sheep is the fleece, right?
Right.
And then she did fleece judging too. So it was really educational for me to be able to be at these fleece shows. And then she was one of the judges at New York Sheep and Wool. And then I decided, well, I'm going to apply to be a vendor just on a fluke because I'd been told numerous times that you have to apply many, many times before you get a spot at New York Sheep and Wool because they are the penultimate fiber
Right.
festival, sheep
Okay.
and wool show, right? I got in on the first application, which
Yay! Yay!
shocked me. But it's been a great experience because you see so many people go through there. Like, I think last year they said on the Saturday they had over 30,000 people walk through the gates.
Wow. Wow. So do you
And
need a trailer or does it all fit in your car or how
no,
does
I have a van,
okay.
which is an old 15-passenger van, which has been stripped of the seats, so it's all
And so yeah, so it's
space.
got all in lots of space.
So I can fit my display units, the yarn, and then my son built it out and he put a platform in the back so we can actually
Sleep.
put bins of yarn underneath the platform, and then the platform has a mattress and I can sleep in there
Yes.
once
Yes.
the place is cleared out, right?
I understand that. Yeah, it's good to be on the road, but expensive. So
Yeah, and this way at festivals you can often camp on the grounds, and
yeah,
that makes life much and also easier because I'm not big on motels, so it's like I'd
me
much
too.
rather stay in the van and have my
Me
own
too.
stuff, and it's like my own little house, and it's
Yeah.
fine.
I like that too. I car camped tons. Like people would think, did she just not like to fly? It's like, no, it's like economical and I like it. So
I
it's
like it. That's really what it comes down to is
yeah,
like, I like it. I mean,
yeah.
there are always things like I did have a bad spring this year because it was a lesson in I cannot control everything, you know,
Okay. Yeah.
because and a lesson in that, yeah, I'm making yarn, but at base, at the lowest level, I'm an agricultural based business.
Right.
And I discuss, and then there are things you can't control. Like there was
Yes.
drought and that affected some of my
Right.
farmers. So that you talk about fleece. One guy, he called me from the shearing floor. He was shearing the sheep, and I was supposed to meet with him the week after to pick up the fleece.
And he said, don't
And he
bother.
called me from the shearing floor and says, I can't sell it to you. He goes, it's the drought, it's weak. And that means weak fiber means it won't hold up in the machines.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was a great guy, and he's a student. He was a veterinary student. I think he finally graduated last spring, but he's a veterinary student and he's honest enough to say that and his stuff was the best quality. I mean, his wool was very good quality. His sheep were well cared for, and that comes out in the wool. And he called me and said, "It's weak. It's all breaking." So he had to compost all the wool from like 40, 50 sheep
Oh my God.
because and it's a blow to him because
Yeah.
that's and I was paying him much more than $1 a pound because his wool was such high quality. And I'd made yarn from it before and I knew it would make a good yarn. And I tell people that when I buy the first time, it's like, okay, I'm paying you $1 a pound now, but if
If
I
it
get a good
changes.
yarn from
Yeah.
this, I'll be back next year and I'll pay you more. I mean,
Right.
what I can afford to, I'll pay you more. And so I was paying him more than that. And so it's a loss for him, but it was
Right.
a big stunner for me too, because I have to plan, 12 months out to get a yarn
Right. Yeah. That's
because
crazy.
I have to wait for mill time. That's the biggest holdup. There are only so many woolen mills in the United States. And the big mills, like the one I worked at, those are becoming fewer and fewer. Like like I told you, I no longer work at the mill because she doesn't do custom work anymore.
Right.
So she took herself out of the custom work job. Well, that meant all those people that used to come to her, because she had a huge client list that kept her busy, they had to go somewhere else. So there are only so many mills, and there are not many. I mean, I could count them on my fingers. The mills in the Midwest, the woolen mills
Yeah.
in the Midwest. The larger ones that have the more stable equipment, they make the best yarn. There's the proliferation of what's called mini mills, which are very small equipment-wise, and they really depend a lot on the proficiency of the operator to get a good yarn. And so, now not dissing anybody here, but the thing is if you just got that equipment, you're not a proficient operator. It
Right.
takes
Yes.
time, like anything
Yes.
else. You gotta
Yes.
practice. It takes time. You'd be surprised when I'm at festivals, somebody will come up to me and say, I can make your yarn. I just bought a mini mill, so send me your wool and I'll make yarn for you." And I'm like, "How long have you had your mini mill?"
Yeah.
A month."
Yeah. It's
And I'm
like,
like, "Who taught you to make yarn?" "Well, the guy who sold us the equipment showed us how it works." I'm like, 2 different questions.
right.
And I will tell people, "Come back to me in 2 years and
Right.
show me some of your yarn,"
Uh,
because
yeah,
it
that
takes
makes
time.
sense. Yeah. Well, and look at all the information that you have gleaned over all these years. Like that's quite a degree of information that you're learning. I do have a burning question. What's the most sought out color when people like what do you see as like the trend in people
And
buying
that is
color?
really interesting because I've been always I keep track of what colors sell, and it varies a lot because, like, I would say, like, well, there's this blue I do that sells really well at some shows and doesn't sell at all at other shows.
Wow. So it's like demographically different
It's
color.
a demographic thing too. Like
Wow.
greens, like I do a color that I call lime. My colors are what you would call jewel toned. That's my
Okay.
signature, right? And I've had people tell me that it's like, your colors are the best colors at this festival, because I do semi solids, they're jewel tones. Generally speaking, they're very
Rich.
bright, kind of in
Yeah.
your face, right?
Yeah. Kind of like the top that you're wearing right now would be like a lime color.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
lime has been selling very well for the past year or so. Lime sells very well. Other greens sell well, but that blue, which was the best seller for 2 years, it still sells very well at certain places, but other places I find the lime goes much faster. And the lime, I always kinda looked at it more as an accent color,
Right.
but no, it sells well. It's kind of interesting because you never know, and like I said, I'll do blue because blue sold really well at the last year's festivals, right? And now this year, I'm kinda wondering, it's like, well, maybe blue is gone. Maybe blue has become passé, right? I have a color called blood, which usually reds don't sell as well as other colors, but I had that color blood. It's a really very deep, intense red. And that was hopping off the shelves one year. It's
Ah.
but not all the time. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, that went for a while and now not.
So
So
you're really only doing two shows a year and then
no,
everything
I
is
do
just on them?
6 or 7.
Okay.
It varies a little. I know people who do shows like every weekend through the season, right? But I have found that my product is more of a niche product. So I do 4 or 5 shows in the spring, and then in the fall, I do these Wisconsin and New York. Wisconsin is in September, New York is in October. And then I've done a couple other ones because I'm always kind of testing different places to see, but I've discovered that my yarns do better at sheep and wool shows. And I think that's just part of because they're a more of a niche and they're more focused on the breed specific yarns. So I tend to do better at sheep and wool shows.
So who's your typical customer? Let's talk about that. And then we're coming
Ah,
up at the end of the hour. So goes
yeah.
so fast,
I
doesn't it?
don't know who the typical customer is. That's a really good question. But it's generally a knitter. It's somebody who is an tends to be someone who is serious as a serious knitter, or a crocheter.
Mhm.
And they are interested in the idea that like a Corriedale has really good stitch definition and it makes excellent sweaters. But it's still, for most people, it's soft enough to be next to the skin, but it's not going to pill as much because it's Corriedale and it's just a more hardy fiber. It's got more bounce to it. It's a springy fiber. Some people call it crunchy. And so these are the people that actually are interested in the idea that like Romney. I have Romney that is so soft, next to the skin soft. I mean, it's silky. It's so soft. But Romney has properties like merino, which is everybody knows because merino had great marketing people at some point.
Right.
And it's a very soft yarn, but merino tends to pill very easy. So it's like you don't want to use it for outer garments. But Romney doesn't pill quite as much, although it's still very soft. It has really good luster. And these are the people who are a little bit more attuned into why there are different sheep, or they're more wanting to learn more about that process and actually do comparisons and see what the difference is, if it makes a difference. Because when you're buying commercial wool off the wool pool, that is a blend of whatever's in that pot,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
And you don't know what that is. So that
Yes.
yarn has not got that predictability that if you buy a breed specific yarn, there's also a predictability factor in how it's going to act, right? So I don't know if I would say, but I would say part of it is, and it's also people who want to support their local community. And that's one thing I like to emphasize is that when you buy yarn from me, it's going to real people, it's paying for, that
Right.
veterinary students'
Yes.
expenses. It's
Yes.
putting, I mean, the kids that wait for me on the steps when I'm looking for their house, it's like, it's going to real people. And I also use mills that are in the Midwest that are often smaller. I use mills right now. I have 4 mills that I use on a regular basis. And those are also local. So when you keep your money in your local economy, I mean, it benefits everybody, including yourself, because you're keeping businesses going that a lot of people don't realize that if you don't have woolen mills, you're going to have problems.
Right. It's really is the definition of sustainable. Now, where can people find your wool? Because we're coming up at the end of the hour,
Okay.
but
So it's
I want people
Purveyor.
to know where to find you. There'll
Yeah.
be links in the description below. So, but let's just talk about where do they find you?
Okay, so I'm at the Purveyor of Fine Yarns, which is a .com website, and you can find majority of my yarns on my website. Although I always tell people, because in the summer I'm doing so many festivals,
Right.
the newer things are not on the website until after I
Right.
finish the shows.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just, but there's always, you can always find out what I'm carrying in general and purchase yarn from the website. You can find me at fiber shows. Like I said, in September, I'm going to be at Wisconsin Sheep and Wool in the second weekend. I'm doing a new show in Escanaba, Michigan called the North American Hill Sheep Show in Escanaba, and I think that's the third weekend in September. It's way down in the month. And then I'll be at New York Sheep and Wool. And in New York Sheep and Wool, I'm in the building by the old horse barn, the 4-H horse barn, which is by the 4-H gate. We're the first building by the 4-H gate, so we're easy to find. But also I am trying to move into wholesale. So ask your local yarn store and see if they will be willing to
Try your wool. Yeah.
try our yarns, because that's
Are
where you're
you on
moving.
Instagram too?
Yeah,
Instagram?
we are on Instagram. We do have a Facebook page, but I always tell people it's like I don't check it very often. I'm not a
Yeah.
big Facebook fan, but
There's only
it's
so much
got
we
all
can
the,
do,
yeah,
really.
and I post on Instagram and then it also reposts that onto Facebook. So it has the
Yes.
same things.
Yes. Which is so now confusing because now I have like double posts everywhere. I'm like, oh my God, like just stop
I
all
know.
this.
It's like I figure it's like I do Instagram and that's what I can keep up with, and that's about
And
it.
so that is Purveyor of Fine Yarns
Yeah,
at
it's just all
Purveyor
written down, purveyoroffineyarns.com, and then Purveyor of Fine Yarns on Instagram, Facebook,
and your website.
and my website. So it's pretty consistent, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
you've done a great job. It has really been an amazing education on a product that I do not know that much about, like just this much, but now I feel like I know that much. And I love that we got to like meet and now we're friends. So if you ever need anything from me, I always tell everybody I'm your friend for life. So please always just contact me and say, hey, it's Kim from Purveyor of Fine Yards, and I want to talk to you about this because we all do need to support each other. And I always tell everybody, you don't have to cry by yourself. Just reach out. I'm a friend. I
Oh,
just
no,
seriously
I
am a
can
friend.
relate to that. Yes.
Yes,
There are
because it's
those
very
moments.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard. But I'm proud of you, and you are on your right path, and you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. And there's plenty of accountants in the world, but there's not a lot of purveyors of fine yarn. So that just seems to be a perfect niche for you. And I'm very proud of you. And I hope that I can like send you business one day because I know your heart is really in your product and having handmade, sustainable wool to make hats and sweaters and heirloom pieces. Like if someone's going to knit something, that takes a lot of time. So you better use the best stuff that you can. And that really makes, then it all comes like full circle because you're using the
Yeah.
best. And it
And
really
that
has a story.
it has a story. And to me, that's what's important is knowing. And I think when you see my ideal client, that's it. Like I had a woman come to me recently in Greencastle, and she's purchased for me past years, and she comes and she's looking at the Shetland and she's like, I'm gonna try Shetland this time. And then she turns and she's like, wait, you didn't tell me the story. And I'm like, oh, the story. Okay, that yarn was raised by a retired math teacher in
I
northern
love it.
Wisconsin. I
And
mean,
the
I
sheep's
know,
name were Bessie Belly and blah, blah, blah. Like you even know part
yeah,
of the sheep's
that
name.
part I don't remember, but I do know. I mean, I can tell you exactly where that wool came from,
Oh,
what
that's
was the process of getting it, where it was
oh,
milled. And I try very hard to be local. I mean, it's very important to me to support all the other people out there
I
because
know
then we
they
all
appreciate
rise.
you.
I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in it. We all rise.
Yeah, we all rise. Well, thank you, Kim, for this amazing education and being my friend. And
Oh,
I
thank
want
you.
only the best for you. And I look forward to seeing you on more Craft Alliance Industries roundtables because it's really a great group. And I have to give a shout out to Abby there, who's really been wonderful to me and all the things that she does for us. So I we'll definitely let her know. I think she needs to be on my show too, just to really talk about the craft industry and how we're going and where we're going. But it's people like you that make a difference in the craft industry. So thank you for sharing your time with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been very fun.
I loved it. I seriously, I learned so much. I can see you doing that whole jobs, every one of those jobs. I can visualize it. Hard work, like seriously, girl, you win. It's a hard thing that what you were doing, but it was really for a reason because now you can speak very clearly on your craft, and that's not very many people can do that. Like you have a unique story. So I hope that this podcast will help you get that story out there and you can put it on your website and have people then understand your process a little bit more. So we have come to the end of the hour. We've
Thank
gone
you.
over a little bit, but thank you, thank you, thank you. And do good. Go and do good things. And wait, one more question. What time of the year does sheep get sheared? What's
It,
that time?
well, usually they get sheared in the spring,
Yeah.
but that gets spread out a bit because some people like to shear before they lamb, and lambing varies by breed. There are a few breeds that lamb in like October. Then there are most of them lamb in the spring, but spring can be anywhere from January to June, right? So it varies a lot. Like I have people that are shearing in December and in
Oh,
January,
wow.
and then I'm picking up a bunch of wool in May when she finishes her shearing.
Wow. It's kind of a year-round process.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's out there.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I can visualize that sharing because I've watched the little shows on that, how they can do it in like one huge pass
Oh
and it's
yeah,
like a
yeah.
huge thing of skin. It's like crazy. So thank you again, Kim Langley from Purveyor of Fine Wool, Fine
Fine
Yarn,
yarns. Yeah.
Fine Yarns. And you can find her on Instagram and her Facebook page, Purveyor of Fine Yarns, and support her business. Tell everybody and get out there and buy some yarn and learn how to knit if you don't know, because I think it's going to be something I'm going to have to do. And I'll retire in a few years. Maybe that's what I'll take up. But thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.